Great. Well, I guess I'll kick us off here since it's a RAC meeting and just say welcome everybody. Thank you for joining this third meeting of the Rural Advisory Committee for the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program. Before we get started, let's just go around real quick and have folks introduce themselves. And I can start. I'm Taylor Larson. I'm the coordinator for the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program here at OWEB. And then I'll just go by who's on my screen here. So I'll start with Amanda.
Good afternoon. I'm Amanda Lowe. I'm the OWEB appointed tribal representative on the Oregon Ag Heritage Commission.
Thanks, Amanda. Ed.
Hey, good afternoon. Ed Contreras. I am on the commission appointed by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and on this RAC.
Thank you, Ed. Bruce.
Yeah, I'm Bruce Taylor, a Fish and Wildlife Commission appointee to the Ag Heritage Commission and vice chair of the commission from Portland.
Thanks for joining us, Bruce. Woody.
Woody Wolf, ODA appointee on the commission representing agricultural interests.
Appreciate you joining us, Woody. Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy Duncrack. I'm the Department of Land Conservation and Development appointee on the commission.
Thank you. And Nancy, you had mentioned you need to hop off at 4, I think that's correct, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Doug.
Yeah, I'm Doug Kramer. I'm the ODA, one of the ODA appointees. So I'm a farmer and and I'm the chairman sometimes.
Yes, and a valued RAC member.
All right.
All right, and then we'll go with the OWEB folks. So Robin.
Hey everyone, Robin Meacher. I'm the Conservation Easement Specialist for the Oregon Ag Heritage Program.
Thanks, Robin. Teresa.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Teresa DeBartoleben. I'm the Drought Program Specialist at OWEB, and I'm here to support Taylor and Robin and take notes.
We are very happy you're here, Teresa. Thank you. Stephanie.
Stephanie Page, Deputy Director at OWEB.
Thanks, Stephanie. Renee.
Good afternoon, folks. Renee Davis, Acquisitions and Special Programs Manager at OWEB.
Great. Eric.
Yeah, good afternoon. Eric Hartstein, Policy Coordinator at OWEB.
Thanks, Eric. And Ellen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ellen Ingemels. I'm the new Grant Support Specialist at OWEB, and I will be supporting OHC and all of your meetings moving forward. I'm replacing Nicole.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. And then we have a couple members of the public joining us, I assume, for public comment. So we are running this meeting a little different than the past. So it's a regular Zoom meeting, not a webinar. And so we ask that if you're not a member of the RAC, just keep your mic muted and your camera off until it is your time to give public comment. But we really appreciate you being here and listening in for the time being. Okay, so with that, just to kind of ground ourselves real quick, we're going to be jumping in kind of where we left off last meeting. And so if you remember, way back to about a month ago, we were working on the Division 15 rules, and those are the rules that govern the conservation easement grant program. And we made it all the way up to the evaluation criteria. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to just kind of recap that real quick and then jump right into working on the rules that govern the evaluation criteria and move on from there. And so with that, I am going to just share my screen so we can practice looking at the agenda real quick and make sure all the tech works. So I'll do that real quick. Everybody see my screen and the very simple agenda we have up here?
Yep.
Okay, great. And I do just want to flag, we'll likely take a 5 to 10 minute break in here at some point. This is scheduled to be a nearly 3-hour Zoom call. So everybody will need that. And if we haven't gotten to it and people start feeling like we need it, just speak up and we'll make it happen. So yeah, like I said, we'll be taking public comment toward the end of the meeting at 4:40. And we've also received several written public comments that you should have all received via email. And if anybody hasn't seen those, let myself and or Ellen know, and we'll get those sent over as quickly as we can. So with that, does anybody have questions before we kind of dive in, or additional frame up that they'd like to offer for this this third meeting of the OAHP RAC before we kind of dive into the work? And looks like Renee, you might have something to add.
Yeah, just quick clarification, because it was mentioned in a few of the public comments. We did not incorporate the past discussions on Division 15 into the version that went out to all of you. We wanted to wait until we had fully walked through the division before incorporating things, because it could be that there's some interconnection with something later in this division of rules. So I want to just make sure that folks know we absolutely recorded all of the great feedback we got during the RAC process, including some of the RAC discussion in response to public comment. And so the next iteration of Division 15 you'll see will fully reflect meetings 2 and hopefully 3, because hopefully we'll wrap up Division 15 at today's meeting.
Yeah, and we're getting some comment just before we started recording. There was some discussion about the difficulty of tracking the track change documents. And so it might be helpful, maybe toward the end of the meeting, let's just put a pin in this, to have a discussion with this group around how to best present the updated documents. Maybe we look at sending out a clean version and a track changes version, so you can kind of see them side by side. Because even me spending so much time with it, it does get a little hard to see all of that red and out, scratched out text and understand what's really in there. So we'll put a pin in that. Anything else? Any questions from RAC members about where we're headed or additional framing? Okay. Well, then I'm going to pull up to start with. I meant to start at the top. Our Division 5 and 15 rules. This is the document that went out for the last meeting and this meeting. And I just wanted to real quickly just make sure that we're grounding our discussion, because we are going to get into the evaluation criteria for the easement program. And I think this is going to be a pretty rich conversation, and it's a big and important part of the rule set that helps folks understand what we're looking for, what types of projects are going to rank well, and what we're really interested in using this program to fund. And so before we dive into that, I just wanted to call attention to the purposes. So just as we're making suggested edits and thinking through that, we're grounding all of our evaluation criteria back to the purpose of the program. And so if you'll recall, the program has three main purposes as outlined in our existing and proposed rule set. So 1, increased economic viability of Oregon's agricultural operations and economic sector. 2, the reduced conversion and fragmentation of Oregon's working land. And then 3, the maintenance or enhancement of fish and wildlife habitat, water quality, and other natural resources on Oregon's working land. So this is, still an open rule set, and so we can always revisit this purpose, especially as the conversation evolves and we, maybe there's things we'd like to tweak in there. So always keep that in the back of your head. And then each grant program has its own purpose. So I just wanted, again, we talked about this last time and we have made a few suggested edits to the purpose of the Division 15 grant program. And I'll just read that one as well. So a working land conservation covenant or easement must be to ensure the continued use of the land for agricultural purposes while maintaining or enhancing fish or wildlife habitat, improving water quality, or supporting other natural resource values on the land. And then, further, covenant and easements funded under the program must contribute to the public benefit I just read at the top, and then must provide for carrying out a purpose of a conservation easement as defined in Oregon statute. So with any questions on sort of the purpose of the program or purpose of the grant program that kind of sits under the larger program? Bruce?
Taylor, this is not a question, but can you increase the size of the document?
Yes. How's
Thank
that?
you. Much better.
Okay. So with all of that, I'm going to take us down to the evaluation criteria, which is where we made it last time, which is 698-15-90. And so a couple of things here. I'm proposing that we actually spend the majority of our time working in the evaluation criteria using the clean version that we sent out also. And I'll pull that up in a minute. I think it'll be easier to see where staff have suggested changes and what the resulting criteria would actually look like. But I did want to spend a minute here highlighting things that we have proposed as staff be removed, so that doesn't get lost. And you'll see, for instance, this sub 2D is crossed out, but actually that's not a proposed deletion. It's a proposed move, and that's what makes this a little bit confusing. So the two proposed deletions that I know of is we had proposed deleting 6 sub E, and we can revisit whether or not folks are in favor of that. And then 7 sub F, which is an evaluation criteria that asks if there's the existence of a conservation management plan on an eased property or a property proposed for a conservation easement. So those are the two proposed deletions. So just we can keep those in the back of our head and we can revisit those, but I just didn't want that to get lost when we make the switch. And I'm going to zoom us back up here to number 1. And to highlight kind of why I'm proposing we move over to the clean version. So you'll see here 1, we've suggested a little bit of a wording change, but basically it stays the same. The regional significance of the agricultural, natural resource, and related social values of the working land that will be subject to the working land conservation covenant or easement. And so we've proposed moving a couple of subs up under 1 to help bring some additional clarity to what we mean by significance. And that's more clearly shown in the clean version of the criteria. So I'm proposing we move over there for our discussion, but we can be jumping back and forth as much as we would like. Robin, what do you think about that?
Just one quick addition to items that we did remove in the clean version. It wasn't a strike through in this document. It was just a comment, but we did end up removing it in the clean one. And that is, what would be sub 7E or 7E?
7 sub E.
The potential for setting an example that will encourage additional working land projects in the region. So that's something that you won't see in the clean version. We have this note here, consider removing, but so in the clean version, it's just not there. So just another one to keep a pin on for folks if reading through the suggested kind of new criteria or edited criteria, if that seems to be missing.
Okay. So without further ado, I'm just going to pull up the clean version and we can organize our conversation that way. Great. Okay, and I'll make it bigger again for folks. Okay, and I think maybe I'll turn it over to Robin to kind of walk us through these because you are most intimately familiar with the evaluation criteria.
Thanks, Taylor. Yes, I think the approach we'll take is we'll kind of flag these items. So it's where we kind of moved things and then also spaces where we actually made adjustments to the language because we did both, and it's a little hard to track, but I do think it's worth, after we kind of talk about each one of these, or at least I talk about them, that we take a moment for you all to kind of consider whether this captures what you would want to see and how that might play out in terms of, you know, you feel comfortable that this is criteria you could actually apply to a project in front of you. And for those that didn't have the benefit of working with these criteria in our previous round, feel free to chime in and ask those who were there how it felt for them. So looking at one now, the regional significance criteria, we did hear some feedback from commissioners and from our applicants and during the last process that it was a little hard to understand like what was intended or what they should be looking for when presenting in their applications regional significance. And so there were some requests that we have better guidance in the evaluation criteria about what that looks like. And I know we started to talk about this last time as well, but we didn't quite get into what staff did to try and give a little bit more context to folks of what we're looking at in these criteria when we're talking about regional significance. So this is where we moved up a criteria that had been lumped elsewhere in the current version. And so that's with the potential viability of the property for agriculture. And then, so that's 1A, and then 1B is the supporting implementation of basically other plans or conservation kind of and ag goals. And so we thought those two criteria are ones that have already been kind of vetted, sat with the commission, sat with staff, and sat with the applicant. And so we didn't want to remove them, and we thought that they were a good way. They did kind of speak to regional significance of these projects, both in terms of their agricultural significance and their natural resource and their related social values. So we thought it was a nice way to lump those in, give a little bit more context to everybody as to what we're looking at when we talk about significance of these properties. So again, they're not additions or new, they're just kind of restructuring from other places in the evaluation criteria. So with that, knowing that we didn't add anything, wondering if folks have any thoughts or feel comfortable with this. Is this what we are looking for when we talk about significance and evaluating significance?
So this is Doug Kramer, and I think I might have mentioned it last meeting, but under 1A there, the potential viability. How is that? How is potential viability defined? Can you or Taylor or somebody give me an idea what you mean by that?
Yeah, so the current criteria talks about viability in the context in two separate contexts. We have the viability of the agricultural operation, and then we have viability of the working land. So the actual land that is supporting the natural resource values and the ag pieces. And so I think both of those are great in both contexts. That's a great question, Doug. I think, you know, when we think about agriculture viability in the context of what we were looking at and what we know other working lands programs look at, we're looking at soil quality. We're looking at the extent of different soil qualities on the landscape. And then we're also looking at water availability, water rights. Because of that, like not just is the water there, but is it legally available for the operator to use? We're looking at, whoa, sorry, I just got my computer shut down. Screen shut down. So 1 second, I can't see my notes. But so those are the types of things we're looking at: the agricultural viability, like how is this land supporting essentially growing or producing livestock and forage for that capacity. And so you'll see the part about the agricultural operations viability later. So I'll kind of table that one until we get to there. But for those of you that work in this space, if you have additional context that you want to bring up regarding viability of a property for agriculture, this is the space to talk about that. So would love your input there, Doug, as well. And then we can talk about whether that's further described here in the rule, or if that's something we as staff take and add into guidance for folks in future cycles.
I actually like your definition of potential viability, because it is important that the land is usable for agriculture. I was, with water rights, with soil quality, what is, if it's not good for farming specifically, is it good for ranching, the grazing, or the haying, or whatever under that side of it? So, but I was concerned that it would talk about, and maybe that's under the operations part, that it's gotta be a standalone deal. And so maybe my further concerns is down under the operations viability instead of potential viability. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Doug. And then it looks like Laura has her hand up.
Hey, I just wanted to check and see, how does this align with the NRCS criteria? Is there a lot of alignment here? I would expect that there would be, but it's been a while since I looked at that document, the ASAP-AL criteria.
Yeah, and are you referencing this 1A specifically, or just in general, the evaluation criteria?
Well, I mean,
both.
I think I'm going to keep asking that question so you can answer it for this one first, and then we can talk about it as we go through them.
Yeah, I would say like the ASAP-AL criteria for Oregon, like they're the Oregon specific one, and is they have, I'd say, more specifics as to viability. So like what I was just describing to Doug about the extent of different types of soils and soil qualities, they kind of have percentages laid out, and then you get a score of like 0 to 100 or 0 to 50. I don't know exactly how they do that. So viability is considered in theirs. They just, I'd say, define it more specifically in different categories as to what they're looking at. So it's aligned but lumped, I would say, in ours compared to theirs at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Bruce.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate the changes here. My concerns are more structural, and I don't feel that strongly about it. But the first criteria really gets at the significance of the property and the project there, which I think is really good. I don't know that I view the potential viability for agriculture as kind of a threshold. If you're not, it doesn't matter. I mean, that's kind of a whole separate criteria for me. But the ones that are currently in number 5, for me, speak to the significance, the regional significance of the agricultural values. And, that's why I would lump those up with in number 1. But that's just the way I think about these. I think it is a little seems duplicative if you get at regional significance in 2 separate criteria, regional significance of agriculture in 2 separate criteria. And the distinction I would draw in, for numbers 3 and I think 4 is, then the question is, how well does this easement, is the easement going to, be effective in preserving that significance?
Okay, good thoughts.
Yeah, that's super helpful.
And just so you all know, you might not be seeing your comments reflected right here on the screen, but Teresa is behind the scenes taking extensive notes. So we are capturing them, and we'll consider them as we do the edits next time. So don't think we're just nodding our heads. Any other thoughts? We can talk a little bit about 1B if folks want, or if that just seems kind of straightforward, happy to just keep moving. Okay, I'll jump to 2, and if anyone wants to bring us back up to 1, feel free. Okay, so kind of Bruce's comments were a great lead up to kind of what we're looking at in 2 and 3. And so really thinking about this from like that threshold context of, okay, in evaluation criteria 1, we're looking at like, what is this working land supporting in terms of fish, wildlife, water quality, natural resource, social values, agricultural values, kind of the whole package. What is the why, essentially, as to why this working land is the protection of it is worth public investment. So that's kind of your threshold in 1. And so then once that's evaluated, established, great. So now what is the applicant proposing to do to protect all those wonderful features that are present on this working land that make it regionally significant? And so 2 and 3, it's a little bit, and what we're just working with what we've got. So these are both broken out in statute. So they do the splitting, that's not a staff choice. That was a statutory choice to split the evaluation of the extent the proposed easement looks at maintaining or enhancing farming and ranching. And then when we get to 3, significant fish and wildlife habitat, water quality. So just a recognition there that while we understand it's one working landscape, so these are all blended, the evaluation criteria splits. So again, similarly, in 2, we made a little bit more, I'd say, of just modifications there. And so we're looking at, how does the applicant, just thinking through like what this would look like in terms of evaluating, how does this applicant in this application propose to reduce the potential for future conversion or fragmentation of the property and surrounding working land? So, back to those purposes Taylor was talking about, this really captures addressing one of those public benefits that the overall program is looking to address, which is reducing the fragmentation of working lands. And so this one is, I think, one of the easier ones to work with because it's a pretty factually based evaluation. Is there easement language that is looking at reducing the fragmentation? So happy to kind of go through questions on that. I think, like I said, I think it was for us one of the easier ones to work with, but that does not mean that we're not missing something in that.
So question is the weight of number 3 given equal weight to number 2? Or
yes, in that none of them are weighted at all at this point. So it's kind of everything's given an equal consideration in the context of, will this project be successful? And is it proposing a project that is addressing the resource concerns in 1? So I think, as to currently, no, they're not weighted one more than the other in the evaluation. I think there's something to be said about, the proposal that's put in front of us to look at how it speaks to both. And sometimes there might be more information provided for 2 over 3 or 3 over 2, and then we have to work with that in the proposal. But currently, the way they work is all of these factors, 1 through 8 or 9, are kind of considered in the context of the project as a whole and its likelihood of being successful.
So let me throw out a quick example, and you guys can maybe give me an idea how you look at it. I know how I look at it. But around the town of Woodburn there, and I think a lot of us are familiar with that, there's a lot of agricultural land around there, and they keep trying to expand that urban growth boundary. If we could somehow get conservation easements on some of that surrounding land and try and push development off of the more productive land, I think it would be a great, wonderful thing. But that more productive land generally does not have any wildlife habitat to it because it's all farmable land. It's all flat. It's all being farmed. And so if a landowner put that in or proposed that to us, there's a lot of qualities that we think would go, that we would really like to do, but it's not going to have wildlife habitat.
Yeah, that's a helpful point, and I want to get to you, Amanda, real quick. But let me just reply to Doug quickly. And I think you're just making the argument, Doug, for why we don't weight the criteria and look at each project and each piece of land sort of as like what it's capable of, and then how well the proposed project is, helping that land meet its full potential. And so some pieces are going to have a lot more fish and wildlife habitat potential than others, and some are going to have more agricultural potential, and there's just going to be a blending depending on which, where the project is located and what the realities are on the ground to start with. And so if we did have a strict scoring criteria that had a certain amount of points and they had to get 0 points for fish and wildlife habitat, it would in some ways tie our hands a little bit. So I think that's one of the reasons that the commission probably early on was choosing not to weight the criteria. But that's kind of how we look at it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Amanda.
I definitely get Doug's point for the, wanting to prevent conversion, especially in already heavily urbanized areas. I would say arguably, though, that protect, maintain, or enhance wildlife habitat and water quality is what the Watershed Enhancement Board exists for, though, because we're not necessarily wanting to promote products that are, not using the latest conservation practices or the most sustainable practices on the land. Unless I'm misunderstanding something.
No. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And it's, it is a balance, like I was saying, with every project as to like what the land is capable of, and just thinking through, does this project as being proposed protect, maintain, or enhance those, those agricultural and natural resource values? But yeah, it's a really good point, Amanda. Laura and then Bruce.
All right, thanks everybody. I think this is a really helpful conversation to be having, because it really gets to the heart, I think, of what we're trying to do here. I started out being ready to respond to Doug's question, but maybe I'll kind of go in the reverse order. I think, Amanda, to your point, I would say that OHP is its own kind of freestanding program within OWEB. And so it isn't, there's lots of programs within OWEB that are just directly only doing fish and wildlife conservation work or that kind of environmental conservation work. And this is specifically very different, calls out ag lands. And I think there are ways that ag lands, just by being in existence themselves, are providing ecosystem services for us, right? Once they're paved, they're no longer providing those ecosystem services. So that does seem really crucial. And I think I've always had the worry that Doug expressed very eloquently, that like, ooh, if you have this amazing piece of farmland, it's a permeable surface. It is absorbing greenhouse gases. It is literally providing a whole host of ecosystem services, but it doesn't have that really specific, like a creek or a riparian area. Does it get discounted in a way that doesn't seem fair? So then to your point, Taylor, I think it's great to have the non-weighted criteria if it's being used in the way you're describing. But I it's never been clear to me. I mean, the way you just framed it up, I think makes a lot of sense to me, but I don't see that logic in the document, or so I don't have a high level of confidence that that is always how the evaluation is being utilized. So can we put something that reflects the comments you just made, Taylor, in the document somewhere, somehow? So that, because I think, you know, to Amanda's point, I think a lot of people come to this without all the history, without all the background, without knowing the NRCS program, without knowing how ag lands have historically been used, not understanding the environmental contribution of ag lands, and they just immediately think, well, okay, if we have a piece of ag land that doesn't have fish and wildlife habitat on it, it should be ranked lower. And I don't think, Taylor, that's what you were saying should happen, and I agree with that, but where is it in the document explaining that?
Yeah, I just
Go
want
for
to
it,
add
Robin.
really
Yeah.
quick too that, so this document, it is the evaluation criteria for the applications that are presented to staff. So in some ways, I think it's also important as you're thinking about, like Laura, that like, not just how is staff going to be looking at, but like, what are we expecting from our applicants as well in telling us that story? And do we want to have things in here that are essentially saying, like, you have to tell us this, and this, or are we giving the space for them to paint the picture and tell the story of the property?
Well, I guess I would say if Doug, who's been with the process since before the beginning, is still asking the question, then I think we need maybe a little more information out there, just that somehow says, I mean, I'm not going to say this as eloquently as you just did, Taylor, but that just says you don't have to have a creek or a stream or an endangered species on your farm in order to rank high in this process.
Yeah, well,
So
I'm not, yeah. I appreciate that comment, Laura. I think I'm not sure it's appropriate for the evaluation criteria necessarily, and it might be more in how these projects get like ranked. And so we could talk about maybe a little bit more with how the review teams work, and what they should be taking into account, because we are interested in the fish and wildlife impacts of a project, and because these criteria aren't weighted, we still want to know, but whether or not that's going to be a quote unquote like disqualifying thing. I mean, we don't speak to that currently, and I'm not sure. I would maybe lean on Renee a little bit, or Eric Hartstein, just thinking about how or where in the rules we might address that if we were to address it. So maybe I'll skip over you real quick, Bruce, but we're coming to you because I think Renee has something to add on that front.
Well, I do, Taylor, but Bruce, is your comment in this vein? Because if so, I think it's relevant to get it on the table before I provide some feedback.
Yeah, I think it's very much in the vein. I love this discussion. This to me is why, and I like your explanation, Taylor, as why we don't have numerical weighted criteria and things like that. This is why we have commissioners, to be able to actually do this calculus in our heads. And Doug's question is a great one. And for me, as a fish and wildlife representative who takes my job seriously, I look at that stuff around Woodburn and I go down and I have to I would move this section, as I said earlier, up to number 1, regional significance, where it refers to, where is it in number
5 down here, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, 5, where it talks about the regional significance based on its location, infrastructure, other relevant factors there. You know, for around Woodburn there, you know, you're talking about the dominoes starting to topple there. And if the case is made by the applicant, and here again, it's up to the applicant to tell the story and persuade us as commissioners, this is really important for agricultural conservation purposes, to protect this property here, I would say, well, I don't care if it doesn't have fish and wildlife habitats. If this is that important, really highly important, that's a good project, and I'd put it in funding. The ranking part gets a little more dicey because we have fewer hooks to hang a judgment on. In the fish and wildlife stuff, we reference the Oregon Conservation Strategy, water quality, a number of things that are a little bit easier to say this is more important than the other. But by way of example, the last round of grants we had, I think it was the Sealy project down around Clatskanie there. From a fish and wildlife habitat standpoint, I didn't regard that as highly important because it's, very abundant common kind of habitat on the lower Columbia River. But clearly that was a setting where the dominoes could start dropping with liquefied natural gas terminals and other port related development down there. So that one, the importance of the agricultural values and the threats there were enough for me to, move it up on my list to say, yes, that's a good project to fund.
Thanks for that, Bruce. And then Laura, I'm assuming your hand is a stale one, but if not, you can speak up and cut Renee off. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to you, Renee.
Yep, thanks, Taylor. Yeah, so I agree. This is such an important conversation. We open rules about every 5 years, and I think this is the place where the rubber meets the road. We have one grant cycle under our belts. We've absolutely learned a lot from that, and I do think I think several folks just recently just talked about things like asking questions in the grant application to get at these issues and provide space for folks to tell that story, to, I think, continue to refine the evaluation process to get as clear as possible. What are we asking technical review teams that this time we're convening to look at? To Bruce's point, I think, what is the role of the commission and how do you overlay that different expertise? We absolutely hear, I think the part of the important piece of this conversation is this is not a binary question of if not the best fish and wildlife habitat, then it is out. Because you're right, this is not open solicitation for OWEB in terms of the grant program, but the program, and we have done some homework in terms of legislative history, it was described at the outset as a dual benefit program. But I think the key that we have to make sure of is, as we're looking at these evaluation criteria, we have the space to get at some of the nuance, like the example that Doug provided. And it's not as though if, in the Woodburn example or the Sealy example, if you don't have, Willamette steelhead or mid-Columbia steelhead swimming through, then you're out of this program. It is not structured in that way. I think we have to create space to get at the host of different priorities and intentions that the program intended at the outset, but in a way that you can say, this may not have 4 endangered species on it, but from a connectivity standpoint, and ag and habitat connectivity can be connected, there is something there. So I think that combination of the questions we ask in applications, how we deploy the review process, the overlay of the commission, and then ultimately the review by the OWEB board, I think that helps us to get at these more nuanced issues. And if there are things that we can do, whether it be in rule or program guidance or in the questions we ask or the evaluation structure that we give to technical review teams to help guard against, I think, Laura, some of what I was hearing in terms of, I hear you say that, Taylor, but I'm not sure that's how that's playing out, that we want to be able to have that conversation, because I do want to be sensitive to how much we burden the rule set to hold versus how much we can continue to be transparent and clear with other pieces and steps in the process. So Taylor, I don't know if there was more that you wanted me to touch on, though, since you mentioned 4 people ago that you wanted.
No, I mean, I think that's really helpful. And I mean, I think this is just kind of a bit of a existential question for the program and something that we just kind of have to hold. But we are in a unique position that as Bruce was alluding to, we have this commission. And so we have this extra layer of expertise that we bring to every project that's submitted to the program. And so even if it does feel a little bit squishy in the rules and the evaluation criteria, it does go through a technical review. It does go through a staff review, and it does go through a funding review here at this commission body, and then finally to the board. So there's a lot of eyes on these projects. And I think, it's up to the applicant to make the case that they're meeting the intent of the program. That's why I wanted to start us off with what is purpose, what we're trying to achieve here. And it does include ag viability, reduced fragmentation, and fish and wildlife habitat, water quality, and other natural resources. And so in order to be meeting the purpose of the program as laid out in rule currently, it does need to do those things to a certain extent. Amanda?
I'll just be quick. I just wanted to follow up my earlier comment and say that Bruce kind of explained better what I was trying to get at, where it is, what we're getting at here is putting the onus on the applicant to demonstrate how this project will reach both of those benefits for ag and for habitat. And it's not to say that it all has to have wildlife or fish habitat on it, but there are soil health practices on a dryland farm that in the end contribute to water quality and erosion overall, as an example. And that was more what I was getting at was, hopefully these farms, if they don't have direct fish and wildlife habitat on it, are still demonstrating the overall landscape and watershed benefit to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Laura?
All right, I, again, really appreciate that. And I think this is the kind of, where we're landing, I feel like is where I feel like after all these years, the program should be. It doesn't matter to me sort of where we add additional clarity. I just feel like where we started the conversation a few minutes ago, with Doug's question, it wasn't totally clear, and feels like it's become more clear in the conversation. And if we, as the RAC, sort of still need to be discussing that, how can we, and I don't see anything, I don't see what gets sort of said to the technical committee, or I don't see anything that's directing staff. So can we add a little bit more of that, just so everyone really does understand? The program doesn't have to be like Gold Star Fish and Wildlife and Gold Star Farmland, right? You can have some that, if you're 90% fish and wildlife and 10% farming, you probably should be an open solicitation. So anyway, I'm not saying that guidance or that sort of explanation needs to be right here in the rule, but it just feels to me like we need to add it somewhere. So I would love to have staff think about that and come back with some recommendations about how to make that just a little more clear.
Really quick, kind of two questions for you, Laura. So one, I think when we get further down, like maybe like Renee mentioned, the space, and Taylor, where we talk about the technical review, that might be a space for additional consideration around like what you just mentioned of like, how is this being applied? And then I do want to kind of go back to Bruce's suggestion, because I think it also talks to what you're saying, Laura, of just like a little bit better signaling in these rules as to what we're talking about with the projects we're looking at. So with Bruce's suggestion, he mentioned moving up 5A and B into kind of 1 about a description of the significance of the property. So I just want to kind of see, Laura, from you, if that helps signal like that those are considerations in the significance of what we're looking at, and can kind of help how we look at things like the trickle down. And then recognizing that doesn't have to be the only space. Like you mentioned, there's many other ways that we can talk about that. But I don't want that suggestion from Bruce to get lost, because I think it might help some of what folks are saying. And if not, then we can also move forward from there.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm open to that. And I think hearing from you all, where else does it seem like it would be embedded in the document so that 5 years from now when we do the RAC again, we're not exactly in the same conversation.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, thanks.
Okay, well. should we
Okay,
move
so
on? I'm sure Teresa got all of that.
well,
Yes.
and then I do
Yes, I
want to
did.
Oh, good.
if we can move on to back, I guess, to 2, because I do want to focus that in on again, like, talking about the working land and what is there is kind of what's being captured in 1, and what I think this discussion focused off of, like, and then going to 2 and 3, like, we're looking at if the applicant is presenting a piece of property in a certain way that says it has these values, then we're looking at what's in 2A and 2B about, like, what are they proposing to do to protect those values. So it's a little less about, like, are they there and, like, are they important, but more about, okay, we've identified they're there and they're important. What are we proposing to do about that? So Bruce, I see you're going to get us started, unless Laura, that's a new hand and not an old one and I missed it.
I'll jump in because I have to get off the call temporarily here very shortly. But this, and I mentioned up above, this number 2 is where I would put the viability question, because, if it's not, the property is not inherently viable for agriculture, then it doesn't, the easement is not going to be effective in protecting viability that isn't there. So that's, again, it's really a structural, not changing the words, just where it goes there. That's my only comment there. And I will be back around 4 o'clock.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Bruce.
Anything else into that people think is missing, or are we kind of capturing at this point what we want to be looking at from the proposed project as to how it's protecting those farming or ranching on the working land?
Amanda?
I feel like I'm going to be the thorn on the side today. Sorry in advance. I was curious, back in when we talked about the climate related evaluation criteria 1 or 2 meetings ago, and how that's in addition to the evaluation criteria. I'm wondering if we don't just insert that language in here too. For example, when you ask about if there's anything we'd add to the protect, maintain, and enhance farming and ranching, there's the climate related criteria for how changing climate conditions are incorporated into the project, et cetera.
I think I kind of want to kick it to Renee or Stephanie or Eric on sort of why we took the approach of putting it in Division 5 as opposed to trying to insert it into each Division 10, 15, and 20. Because I think there's a strategy behind that I'm not sure I can fully articulate.
Yeah, thanks, Taylor. And Amanda, thanks for the question. And for the record, there are no thorns and sides in RAC conversations. All of these different questions and perspectives I think are so important. We incorporated it into Division 5 because the intent, since OWEB board holds ultimate decision authority on it, is it would flow through all OHP programs. So Division 5 helps to kind of quickly and simply get that message translated down to the OHP program. I do hear what you're saying on this. I wonder, we could contemplate something related to climate in rule. I think my inclination though is probably more in, and I think this goes to Laura's point, like without seeing all of these pieces together, it's hard to know what lives where, but like thinking through how can we better ask questions related to that in an application to give folks space, and not saying that all of a sudden the climate criterion has greater weight than anything else. That's not the issue, but just helping to encourage folks to show those connections, describing it some in the program offering. And I think the other important piece to get it also some of the public comments is helping folks to understand how to tackle that climate related criteria that feels a lot less familiar in the OHP context. The OWEB board spent a lot of time working through this and provided a lot of resources and backgrounds to applicants of our standard programs. We're going to have to do the same with OHP. So I think we can do that certainly in application and guidance. My question is just, should we try to incorporate something climate specific in rule for Division 15? I guess that would be a question for all of you to think through. Would that be helpful to create a more distinct connection between the broader criteria in 5 and how the rubber meets the road in 15? Or could it lead to confusion absent knowing like how we will help support applicants to understand that in application questions in program guidance? So Amanda, just any reaction to that initial long response?
No, I appreciate you taking the time to explain it to me. I like what you said about, it's in Division 5 because that applies everywhere across the board. So I guess I just wanted to make sure that, it's not just in Division 5 in the background, but that it's actually going to be carried forward for all the programs. So if it ends up incorporated into the application process in the same way these evaluation criteria already are, then that makes perfect sense to me. Thank you for the explanation.
Yeah, thanks for asking for the clarification. Stephanie.
Yeah, great explanation, Renee. And I was just going to add that's similar to the structure and how it's worked in the open solicitation programs where the climate criteria have been in their Division 5 rules rather than in the program specific rules. And in terms of what the applicant sees, it's in the guidance and the resource materials and in the application itself. So there is it seems to be working so well so far after one round of applications.
Great. Okay, Robin, do we have what we need on 2, you think?
Yeah, I mean, unless there's any additions, but I think we can move on, and if folks have ideas or things come to mind, we can always pop back up to it. And so again, putting in context for 3, just again, this is once it's been established that this working land has significant fish or wildlife habitat, water quality, or other natural resource values. So once that kind of case has been made in the context of 1, what is the proposal proposing to do to protect, maintain, or improve those? And so A and B are put in there as kind of like, this is what we're going to look at to see how this easement is proposed easement project is looking to address those. So same question as 2. Is this enough? Is it too much? Do we need to build out either A or B? And I'll just pause it there. Ed?
Yeah, I wouldn't be doing my job as a Fish and Wildlife representative if I didn't have a comment here. But no, I think it's a good catch-all criteria, right? Protect, maintain, or improve quality and connectivity. I recognize that you're talking about the habitat itself in and surrounding the property. So I think it's no need to make this too complicated. And I think in reference to the previous discussion, it was actually a little interesting, with having the ag value and the habitat value on equal footing. Previously we had, with the proposed criteria, there was, 2 questions about the ag gains and outcomes and benefits, and really only one around wildlife. And so I think if we have the number of questions, criteria in relation to the ag value and the wildlife and other natural resource value, then we can get things on equal footing. And hopefully that, is apparent to everybody that we're looking at both benefits within this evaluation process.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ed. I know we've spent some time with this, Robin, but I'll throw one out just to get some wheels turning. So we call out the fish and wildlife benefit, 3 sub A, and we call out the water quality benefit in 3 sub B. But we don't have any sub criteria about the other natural resource values that may bring significance to a project. And so just wondering if we're comfortable just leaving it in the top in just 3 and not having a sub related to what we mean by other natural resource values, or if we feel like there's a need to bring some clarity to applicants as to what we're looking for in that regard.
And this might be a space where we can, well, we've lost Bruce, but so maybe we'll just kind of lean on you a little bit, Doug, too, and the others that established this and worked with the statute kind of at the outset of translating, because the other natural resource values is something that was included in statute. So if there's anything missing in that regard and you all have additional context to share, we would benefit from it.
So in my opinion, what's kind of missing in there, really missing, is soil quality and soil enhancement. And what I mean by that is the soil, at least on my farm, the better I maintain the living organisms in the soil, the better agricultural production, the better plant growth, the better fruit quality, so on and so forth, that I get. But that soil quality is based on the microorganisms in the soil, which are very difficult to quantify, I guess. Nobody can really give an accurate count or assessment of what the microbiology in that soil is, but most people know when that microbiology is good and when it's not. And we also know the management practices that enhance soil quality and which ones do not. So I don't know if we want to open that can of worms, so to speak, but I'll throw it out. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. And so could that be something as simple as just adding a C that says protecting, maintaining, or improving soil quality, or something similar to that?
I think that would be a good addition.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, well, let's hear from Laura, and then we can discuss further.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Doug. That's immediately where my head went, was to soil health. And I think one of the big challenges there is, especially when you're talking about annual agriculture, those practices tend to be annual in nature. and like you were saying, Doug, really hard to measure. I think I would back out of that a little bit to sort of the 40,000 foot level and say, if we're protecting this land, that is the, you know, and to put it into context, I mean, this is also very importantly an NRCS matching program. And that's a big emphasis for NRCS, is like just by protecting the farmland, especially protecting from urban development, like you were talking about, Doug, and Woodburn. Obviously it's great if you can get those improvements in practices, but that seems like a really hard thing to match with this program, which is really about permanent protection. So I would say just by preserving the land, we are preserving the opportunity to then improve soil health.
Thanks. All right, so to start moving us along, I'm just going to start moving and you all can stop me if you need to, but thank you for that. And like I said, our notes are being captured. And so we'll work with your comments for the next iteration. And so we moved the criterion about management plan. So this is not a necessarily new, it's a restructured and replaced. And by, from one that already existed around management plan. And we just wanted to kind of confine a little bit more what we were talking about in the context of a management plan regarding or related to conservation easements, and then put it out there as to, you know, is this something that the RAC and others think is an important evaluation criteria when looking at the different projects, recognizing that these criteria are here not just to establish is this an eligible project, but really to help inform the ranking and ultimate funding award. So, you know, we do need criteria and considerations when we're looking through these for our technical review teams to work with when they start ranking projects as to how they're addressing these benefits. So, for essentially reads whether the project includes the development and implementation of a management plan that supports the integrated maintenance or enhancements of the agricultural and natural resource values on the land. So I'll leave it there, let folks weigh in on that. And then if you want us to go to the old or the current language regarding management plan as a criterion, happy to jump over there really quick just so you can see those adjustments, or can just read it. But
hey, Robin, can I jump in just really quick? So I know some of the public comment was around, hey, wasn't there discussion about not having a management plan at all in this program at the last RAC meeting? And yes, and all of that is captured and has been processed. I think Robin helped at least me to understand, like, this is a different question. It's not related to yes or no on a management plan and as a requirement of this program, but it's kind of understanding what is the game plan as envisioned for the property. And so I do think, like Laura, this could connect to, well, actually there were multiple comments on this front. There's kind of the protect piece. There also could be the enhancement piece. And so I think that this criterion, as I kind of understood better the fit, as Robin explained it to me, I thought it is absolutely worth asking the question to the commission. Currently you're serving as a RAC, but ultimately you would be looking at projects like, could this be helpful in understanding what the game plan is with a piece of property if they are thinking through things like management practices that Doug was describing. So that just, it helped to explain it to me a bit more. And so that's why I wanted to share it, but definitely just open to feedback, knowing we had that separate management plan as a requirement later in the program piece. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Robin.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. Let's go to Ed and then Laura.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up the points that Renee brought up. This is a tough one for me. I think, there's pretty consistent feedback there that the management plan is another layer in this process, right? And when I think about a conservation easement and what we're really, what's written in stone is what's in the D terms, and that's what we are investing in, right, through this program. I think there's definitely a place for management plans in land management, in general, but I wonder if we're complicating things within this process and in this program by continuing to include that in the criteria and other parts of the rules here. So that's my perspective on it.
Yeah, appreciate that, Ed. And then Laura.
Thank you, Ed and Renee. I completely agree. I think the problem here is just in the naming it an ag management plan. So what I want is for the applicant to really be able to sell us on all the great conservation benefits of the farmland. And so I want there to be an opportunity for the applicant to do that. And I don't want to call it an ag management plan because that is something that's defined elsewhere. And I don't honestly think, there's plenty of farmers who are doing great work and providing huge conservation uplift and who have never even heard of an ag management plan. So to me, it's the naming of it. How do we create the space for the applicant to tell us about the conservation uplift, but don't call it an ag plan because it doesn't have to be that. It could be anything. It could be just practices. Or it could be something, not even practices, like inherent to that piece of property. So that would be my preference, is to take that ag plan or ag management plan language out of there, but still provide the opening for the applicant to give us the info.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, and that could potentially be a pretty straightforward edit. It looks like you just removed the language around the development and implementation of a management plan. Just ask whether the project supports the integrated maintenance. Okay, so Woody?
Yeah, I really like where Laura was going with that. I'm not opposed to management plans, but I just when you attempt to tie one to an easement, I just think there's inherent problems with an easement being in perpetuity, or if it's a covenant for 30 to 50 years, and it really needs to be very concise and very static. And good management plans are dynamic and evolving all the time. And it seems like a space to waste a lot of time that's just going to, the management plan is going to change if it's going to be effective. And so I'm a fan of management plans, but I don't like tying them to easements. I think their functions should be separate.
And this is Doug. I agree with Woody. I know when we sat down and put these rules together in the first place, we were trying to keep this part of it in line with what NRCS did. And I think we did not pay attention to the definitions or the words we were using. I don't think we really meant management plans in the terms we use under our other program under OAHP of management plans. I think what we meant here was how to explain in the application how the land was going to be managed and keep it very similar to what NRCS's requirements were, so that these applicants didn't have to do a lot of extra work for our program over and above what they were already doing for NRCS.
That's helpful context, Doug. Thank you.
And so I do just a little bit of context on that too. NRCS national ranking criteria does essentially give the state the option to have a management plan, or they call them an ale plan or a grassland plan, depending on how they, the different pathway that the entity chooses to go with NRCS, and they get the award. So there are types of plans that are either required or optional for the entity in the ASIP ale program. So those plans that speak to the management of the conservation easement property are contemplated and used in the NRCS program. And they do have as part of their ranking, kind of what they can use as ranking criteria, whether the state office or the state wants to use management plans as part of that ranking. So it's in terms of like compatibility with the program, it's just talking about whether part of the ranking, not the then requirement. So good feedback from you all on, I think we're hearing like the extra complication of a requirement regarding a land management plan to be incorporated into the easements is something you want reconsidered. So hearing that for sure. And then I think Taylor had a good, just to this point, if we wanted to reword this to still talk about whether and how the project supports the integrated maintenance of, so Taylor, I think like if you want to just do a quick deletion so people could see how that would read, then we can throw it back in.
Okay, let's see.
Or not, if that's going to take too much time. I don't want to belabor it, but I do think if people found the rest of that to be viable, we could leave it in.
Or this here.
Yeah. So it looks something like this, whether or how the project supports the integrated maintenance or enhancement of the agriculture. So it's not, again, speaking to an actual plan and something that they have to incorporate into the easement, but tell us about how your practices are supporting how these work together. Is that, Woody's got a thumbs up, Doug and Laura, does that kind of speak also to what you all were talking about previously about like, there's practices that happen that, okay, great. I'll stop there. I see thumbs up for those that are not looking at the screen. Okay.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you for that. You can put it back in, Taylor, so we don't inadvertently change a document. Okay, I think this next one, so 5 is a criterion that is in statute, at least the first part. So the first part, the extent to which the covenant or easement would protect agricultural outcomes, benefits, or other investment gains, is this from statute as part of what needs to be part of the evaluation for these projects. A and B, we talked about earlier as they already kind of exist in our evaluation criteria. We've tried to lump them or put them elsewhere. Bruce suggested popping them up into significance. And so I guess my thought there is, do we want to talk about what we mean by agricultural outcomes, benefits, or other investment gains? So we can put a little bit more context out there for what we're going to be looking at when we are getting applications from folks, because I do think it would help our applicants to know what we're looking for here.
So to me, the agricultural outcome that I prioritize highest is the continued working lands part. It stays in agriculture and it continues to be farmed. It doesn't sit there idle or growing weeds or something like that. You know, if there's a water right to the property that needs to be maintained, and it needs to be being currently farmed for some kind of a crop, be it, you know, grazing, hay, you know, annual row crops, permanent berry crops, whatever the right management for that property is. But the agricultural outcome is that it stays in productive agriculture.
It's helpful. Thank you.
Woody,
Woody?
go for it.
Yeah, I guess as I'm reading it, where it says other investment gains, I'm trying to remember the context where that's not fairly ambiguous. That could be interpreted. I think it is important, as Robin said, to define this, because without that definition, that could be interpreted many ways.
So I think one of the ways you could think about that is, you know, are there activities that have happened in terms of, like, you know, NRCS support of irrigation modernization or something that are significant investments of the land that have happened on this property, or, you know, not even NRCS investments, but has the landowner made significant investment in its infrastructure or certain practices that
should that be specified that it's other agricultural investment gains? So like water enhancements, habitat enhancements, but not, I mean, just the term investment gains. I mean, I know this is centered around agriculture and environmental protection, but yeah, I don't know if the word agricultural investment gains, the phrase would be appropriate, or if everybody's completely clear with how it reads now.
Yeah, I wish I was a bit better at grammar. I'm not sure if the agricultural outcomes, comma, benefits or other investment gains, that first agricultural ties to all three, or if it just ties to the first.
I think it would also be something maybe we could just add in an A or a B and spell it out a little bit more, because currently it matches the language directly from statute. So when we start inserting, like, and that's kind of maybe more of a question Eric Hartstein, but when we start inserting things, I think we can do it, but if we could do a sub that kind of laid out agricultural investment gains and explain such as, or something like that.
It had the examples or a definition of.
Yeah. Yep. Laura, I see you've got your hand up too.
I was just going to ask my usual question, which was, is it defined by NRCS? Because it sounds like you were saying it's in our statute, but it might have come from some NRCS language originally.
I actually don't know whether this one does have a tie. I can definitely cross-reference, and that might be a very helpful place to look. So thank you for that. I was just using NRCS, like previously funded NRCS enhancement projects as, like, is that the type of investment gain we're talking about here? It could be any other kind of funded, you know, OWEB funds certain ag modernization stuff too. So
yeah, And I just wanted to agree with Woody. I mean, feels to me like clear as mud right here. So it would be good to understand where it came from and how much we're able to actually change it. Because obviously, like you said, if it's in statute, then we don't want to change too much, but we could clarify with some subsections. And that seems like a good thing to potentially at least think about doing.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. And I think I would just like to, I guess, maybe do a quick gut check on this one, just thinking through at least how I'm thinking about it currently. It seems like this is so much of our evaluation criteria is about the land itself, what the land's capable of from a habitat and agricultural perspective. But this one kind of gets at what have the operations on that piece of land, what investments have been made, what outcomes are being achieved, and how would this project protect those and enhance those. So it's kind of the opportunity to engage with the entity that's either on the land currently or has been most recently, and take that part into account. So is that what we're trying to achieve with 5, or am I kind of off base on that?
So I'm going to put a pin in 5 and say the general consensus is it would benefit from some clearer definition about what we mean by agricultural outcomes and benefits and investment gains. We'll go back, look at if that's defined elsewhere in other ag programs, particularly NRCS, and then have some clarifications proposed in the next round. Great.
Hey,
Okay,
Robin.
hopefully. Oh, yeah.
Just really quick, I think the other piece with 5, just to put a pin in a reminder for folks, is the comment from Bruce about there are pieces of this that are relevant above 2.
Right.
So just, I think that's the other part. We will be cross-checking that without inappropriately breaking apart number 5. We hope to just clarify what's confusing in number 5, but we will cross-check the comment about connecting up to number 1 with like the kind of overall context of the place before we start talking about the easement as a tool.
Yep. Thanks. Okay, hopefully we can breeze through the rest of them, because not significant changes were made in these contexts. So looking at 6, this is speaking to, okay, we've looked at the proposed project. Now let's look at the entity that's proposing it, and kind of what the actual implementation and transaction looks like. So again, we changed very little here, and I'll just read it. This is looking at the capacity and competence of the applicant and the proposed easement or covenant holder. So I think that's an important just thing to look at, is that our projects take various forms of partnerships where we have the applicant may not be the holder of the easement, but we are saying we need to look at both here. And I think that's an important thing to continue to just keep in the context of we fully support partnerships in these projects, and we want to be able to make sure that we're looking at both entities or all entities that are in part of this. And so then that's to purchase, accept, implement, hold, monitor, steward, and enforce a working land conservation covenant or easement. So again, that just breaks it down from looking at the capacity and competence to do the transaction and get the easement in place, and then also their capacity and competence to kind of do the implementation aspects after the fact. And so that breaks down in a couple different things. Again, we made very limited changes here, other than what we mentioned earlier, where we removed the strength of the organization as measured by effective governance. So looking at accreditation or similar types of standards and practices that an organization implements, recognizing that not all entities are required or are accredited, and we're not going to require accreditation, but we do want to kind of make sure that they're following certain types of business practices that are similarly aligned with best practices on that. And then inclusion of working land preservation in the organization's mission, vision, or other organizational documents, financial capability of the organization to steward the conservation covenant or easement, and demonstrated relevant commitment, ability, expertise, and track record to kind of do the work of the project. So again, I think folks, if there's anything missing or you have any kind of question about how those are implemented and applied, have to cover those, or we can hop down into 7.
Quick question for you, Robin. How many of the organizations we're working with on the current applications actually have national accreditation?
All applicants are either accredited or in the process of seeking accreditation.
Okay, that's what I thought. So that should not be a stumbling block at this point.
No, I don't think so. And I think, you know, one thing that's kind of comforting about what the Accreditation Commission does is they essentially created like, you can see the standards and practices, you can view those online. You don't have to be accredited to see what those are. And they're based off of best practices of land trusts across the country. So, you know, most of our applicants are meeting that regardless of whether they're accredited or seeking accreditation. And so I think that's just a testament to Oregon land trusts and entities. And then I think also it's important to note that soil and water conservation districts, which are absolutely eligible in this program and to hold easements and covenants, can't at this point seek Land Trust Alliance accreditation. So we really want to make sure that we're not unintentionally hamstringing ourselves there.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, pop down to 7. Scroll down just there we go. Great. So on what is now 7, we did not change anything here from what is in the current rule set, except removing the potential for setting an example that will encourage additional working lands projects in the region. So everything else here, same. And this is kind of looking at, you know, like how much match and other financial support and interest from partners is an applicant bringing in, essentially, you know, maximizing, leveraging the dollars that OWEB's contributing, the duration extent of the agreement with a preference. So this, I think, is something that the commission chose at the outset to put a preference on perpetual agreements over termed. And then cumulative effect of similar conservation or agricultural investments in the community, including OHP funded plans, covenants, or easements. And so this is looking at, you know, that where does this fit in the context of other plans, other programs that have invested nearby or onto this property. And then consistency with local comprehensive plans and statewide planning goals. That's a pretty standard one that I think is just, we don't want to be unintentionally undermining our land use process and our land use system. And then since we did remove the potential for setting an example, does anyone have comments on that or concerns?
Hey, Robin, just one thing from more of an OWEB perspective, in terms of our experience with questions or criteria like that, is we absolutely want to encourage applicants to talk with us about what is community engagement looking like, how might proof of concept be useful. So not limiting that potential in the story that an applicant is telling about a project, but also not creating a space where someone could just say, yeah, sure, we're doing that. And it's going to be an example, and having it as a criterion, because we have seen at times in other grant programs where you can say something in a grant application and have good intentions. And if you give a bump up for that in terms of a criterion, you know, it may or may not happen, but it's a little bit of a false narrative if you, I think, put too much weight on it, and it doesn't negate the importance of a proof of concept and the potential to spur other action. So I think that's just an important thing that we'll encourage in the application questions and the program guidance is just, please do tell us that story, but not including a criterion where we can't really kind of fact check something and it's easy to make a statement that doesn't always play out.
All right, hearing no thoughts there. 8 is, so we did make adjustments to this one. We kind of rewrote it. And well, we substituted the language in the current evaluation criteria with the language directly from statute. So this is something that statute says these projects need to be evaluated on. And so we just kind of walked it back to that language. And we are happy to put the other one on screen so folks can see what the original language was. Amanda.
A clarification question for number 8, because it's the impacts on owners or operators of neighboring lands, but I really appreciated what Renee just said about how local communities are informing these decisions too. And, you know, for example, the tribe might not be an owner or an operator on neighboring lands, but they're definitely, you know, impacted by this. So is the intent really just to address the impact on neighboring owners and operators, or is it to address the impact on the community as a whole?
I think from the statutory language, I think the intent of this specific criteria is owners or operators of neighboring lands. That doesn't mean that the RAC can't build that out as they had done previously with additional language. And then I think also we have in the public involvement section of our rules where we consider written comments and from the public, but also we have, OWEB has a engagement policy with our tribal entities that Ken Fetcho does for us. So we can talk about that more specifically in there and then see if we want to add to 8 for more of a criterion aspect.
I guess just from some of the conversation we were having earlier on some of the other evaluation criteria where we're putting the onus on the applicant and the land trust to kind of do that evaluation of impact to the local community and demonstrate in the application what impact their project's going to have is just my thoughts on it. And I am aware of the tribal consultation process in existence too, but.
Yeah, so maybe it would be worth popping the old language onto the screen, because that still speaks directly to owners or operators, but it does talk a little bit more about like actually asking the applicant about their engagement.
I'm sorry it's crossed out, but I can.
You can reject the change and it'll.
Oh, wow. Computer wizard.
So this is what it currently is in our criteria. And again, it is focused on owners or operators, but I think, and again, I'm gonna punt this to Eric to fact check me if we are not able to elaborate and expand on statute.
Yeah, no, we can definitely clarify in rules what's noted in statute.
Well, and we could also, I mean, statute says must include, but not, it's not limited to. So we could put an additional one if we wanted to separate them out too. So I think there's space for that, but.
Hey, Robin, just really quickly on this one, I I think that it is important to make sure we are accounting for some of the lessons learned from the first cycle. So for example, there was some confusion about the requirement for a public hearing. We did do some research and actually adjusted midstream because OWEB is not holding a conservation easement, we're holding a third-party right of enforcement. And so there was concern about essentially kind of confidentiality related to landowners engaged in this program. And so that is something that we already have adjusted in the program. We need to update the rules to basically match that. I think this one, being mindful of as we talk about this particular criterion, I think questions have come up around kind of plan of engagement with neighboring landowners about how to mitigate any impacts. And so I think just balancing, I absolutely hear what you're describing, Amanda, in terms of, what does community engagement look like? And being mindful of these are land transactions. And so I think just the question of confidentiality and the ability of an individual landowner to engage with a land trust or an SWCD on work like this, it will be an important topic to balance, I think, if we're contemplating language for this criterion.
Right. And I wasn't even thinking so much from the public engagement or public meetings for achieving a conservation easement. I was speaking more generally to how the easement will affect, either benefit positively or negatively, the local community, rather than, we need to involve everybody in the easement process, start to finish.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think this is Doug. I think this was one of the heartburns of the land trust was there is definitely some of our applicants, the landowners, that don't want their neighbors to know how their finances look or what they're doing on their property. And so I think as a commission, we need to be sensitive to that, to the point that certainly if they're going to detrimentally affect a landowner, they need to be letting us know how they're going to be communicating that with those neighbors. But if there is no change of how the land is managed, I think we need to be careful that we don't require something that the landowners just won't go to.
Thanks, Doug. Taylor, do you want to switch back to the proposed? So
yeah,
we can just see. So Doug, to that point, so 4.8 talking about like owners or operators of neighboring lands. This is the statutory language regarding this criteria. So do you want us to?
I think that language looks good.
Okay, thank you. And then, so 9 and 10 are essentially the same as Laura.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify. So the proposal is to remove the language that talks about hearings.
No, and we'll get to that when we cover our public engagement.
Okay.
Yeah, because they're two different types of things that we're looking at here.
But Laura, Robin, you said no. OWEB will not be holding a public hearing. If, for example, an SWCD is required, because you are an entity that would hold a public hearing in this case, like then a district would need to, but OWEB is not itself convening a separate public meeting from anything that's already required in the easement statute for other entities.
Okay, so that was my question. Thank you, Renee. So that is a change that is being made in this rulemaking, is that OWEB is no longer sort of by default always having a hearing.
Correct.
Well, I want to clarify that the rule actually never said that. So we are not making a proposed change to the rules because the rules never made that.
I could have sworn that was in there somewhere.
It
So
is
it is-
confusing and yeah.
It was
Sorry.
misinterpretation, I believe, Laura. I wasn't around for this, but just from what I understand, it was misinterpretation of the existing easement statute would apply if OWEB was holding an easement on a fee simple. So for example, through our traditional land acquisition program. But if we have third-party right of enforcement on a district or a land trust that's holding an easement with a landowner, then a public hearing is not required, and there was confusion around that.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Thank you for that. Yeah.
And sorry,
clarification.
Yep.
Got it.
And so the language and the reference to public hearings held in accordance with that statute will remain. But just we as a agency and a program clarifying that we will not be holding those in our. Okay, so if no one has any heartburn on 9 or 10 or additions, I think we can move on from evaluation criteria with the recognition that you'll be seeing another. This will look different next time it comes to you. Great.
Okay. Going back.
Taylor, do we want to give folks a 5-minute break?
Yes, we do. Thank you for that, Renee. So it is 3:48. So let's just give it 3:55. So let's everybody be back here and we'll start at 3:55. So don't be late. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, it's 3:55. So if you can hear me, come back.
We're all here.
Great. All right, then I'll kick it back over to Robin to talk through technical review and funding process.
Thanks, Taylor. Can you pop it back up on the screen, please?
Oh, that's right. I'm not sharing. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it, Justin.
Yeah.
Great. All right, is the size good for folks? Hearing none. Okay, so we will just jump right into this one. So we are proposing a number of edits to this after kind of some time staff spent looking at the full statute, because OHP, our statute does mention technical committees and the commission's roles and the board's role. And so we spent a good amount of time with the statute just looking at really like what is the intention here, and then also just to align better with our kind of OWEB agency practice and just the realities of working with volunteer review teams and what that can really look like. So I don't know if I really want to read all of this to you all. So I think I'll just put it out there first to ask if anyone had questions or concerns about the edits suggested in here. And then if anyone does just want to dive deeper or hear more from us on these, happy to do that. But yeah, I think I'll just open it up for questions or concerns on this part.
So question on number 3, it's the technical committee will provide the rankings to OWEB and then OWEB provide them to the commission. Not sure why that particular way of doing it. Is that just the way it's done?
Yeah, it's really just kind of the facilitation of how those rankings get to you. Since OWEB staff is convening the meeting, we're essentially getting the ranking. It's not like there's going to be any change in that. It's that the ranking will be essentially just kind of processed through OWEB staff to be given to the commission in the context of all other evaluation and recommendation documents. And
so basically you're trying to tell us how it's being done now. You're not recommending changes.
Correct. Yeah, we're just clarifying in the rule of
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and Eric, before we move on, just if you want to throw something in there.
Yeah, it's a good question, and you know, the reason it's set up this way is that if the technical committee was reporting directly to the commission or to the board, technically it would have to be a public meeting. And the way that it is set up now, if it goes from a technical review team to OWEB staff, and the OWEB staff provides along the funding recommendation to the commission, then it does not have to be a public meeting.
Thank you. That was helpful. Great. Any other thoughts, comments on that before we jump down to 110? Perfect. Thanks, Taylor. And again, in this one, our changes are based on, they're really just for clarification edits and making appropriate references to rule chapters and divisions, and then also adding in 3 just that those funds will go to not just OWEB, but to OWEB for the purposes of the program. So thought that needed just a little bit more clarity there. And happy to take questions or comments on this one as well. Okay. Let me pop down to public involvement. So again, this is kind of to the conversation we were having in the evaluation criteria. Just want to point out, we're not making a proposed change, but we do want to kind of clarify for folks what sub 2 and the process that is followed there. So as was kind of, there was some confusion in previous cycles about OWEB holding a public hearing regarding applications that came in through the program. We kind of course corrected pretty immediately upon review of our obligations under the statute. And so OWEB has never held a public hearing regarding any applications to the Oregon Ag Heritage Program for conservation easements. But we are wanting folks to understand that there are certain entities that are eligible for the grant offering that may be required under this statute to hold their own public hearings. And we will be asking for those comments that they receive and will be using, kind of compiling those to give to the commission and the board when they're deliberating on the applications that are in front of them. So this is kind of both recognizing that there are entities that kind of have to do this on their own, but also putting folks, letting them know the expectation that we will want those comments and be taking those comments that were received at those hearings and bringing them into the OWEB board and the commission's evaluation. So happy to continue or add any more clarification to that, but wanted to, just put it out there. We recognize the confusion that happened around this and are making kind of internal adjustments and have made internal adjustments, but that doesn't require a change in rule. All right, great. Down. Okay. So director funding approval and distribution of funds. So we didn't provide a proposed change on 1A, but you'll see we have a comment in there of there is a statutory requirement that landowners that are participating in a covenant or easement agreement understand, or that there's a demonstration that the landowners understand what the project is requiring of them. And so we, looking at that, recognizing that OWEB has a landowner acknowledgement form that we require at the time of application, that we can make some adjustments to that so that we're not kind of having the landowner have to give us bits and pieces in different ways. And then also just a recognition here that the grant agreement is really an agreement between OWEB and the grantee. And so having an obligation of the landowner as a quasi party in that agreement just didn't seem appropriate. So we're just suggesting that we move the context around the signed statement from the landowner into either an application requirement, or we put it into our grant agreement. We have it in our land use acknowledgement form. So we didn't want to strike it from here, but we are suggesting that we remove it from grant agreement conditions or part of the grant agreement. So if folks feel comfortable with that, you'll see that reflected in the next draft that comes to you. And then do you want to kind of, oh, Laura?
I just wanted to clarify, was that at the request of the applicants? Is that just seem like it's confusing, or remind me why that is changing?
That we take it out of the grant agreement?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's more of a just ease of administration suggestion. Like I said, we have our landowner acknowledgement forms that already require the landowner to sign them. And so we can just adjust those forms to to talk about not only that they acknowledge that the application's going in, but what the easement document obligations would be. So it's more ease of administration on OWEB's end that we hope would also be easier for the applicant, but it wasn't a direct request from applicants.
Okay, thanks.
And so down to 3, where the font is surprisingly small, smaller than everything else. So this is a space that we are adding to kind of how funds are distributed through the program. So the way that this section works right now is essentially that the grantees have to have met every condition, basically have the project ready to go to closing before they can start being reimbursed for certain due diligence costs and expenditures. And so we are proposing adding something in here that really lets the grantees ask for reimbursements of funds, and essentially lets OWEB distribute funds for certain transaction costs or due diligence activities prior to all conditions being met. And this is in alignment with how we do it in our land acquisition program, and really a recognition of kind of that shared risk that our grantees are taking on significant financial burden as they're putting together and paying for due diligence costs leading up to the hope of getting to closing, the expectation of getting to closing, and so that we can have a little bit of a shared investment prior to closing in that. And Laura, I don't know if your hand is from this or a holdover, but happy to take
It was a
questions.
holdover, but I just wanted to say, I feel like I have heard this from some of the applicants, so I really appreciate you guys including that in there.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay, if no questions there, no suggested changes to the next, to 140. The next space where we're suggesting making changes is in 150, and that's grant reporting requirements for covenants. So this is specific to just grants for the acquisition of a covenant. And so it's kind of focused mainly on clarification of roles and also taking out that last sentence, which is a little prescriptive for rule. And we can have time frames like that in other areas like the grant agreement. Okay, not seeing any thoughts on that one. Payment relationship between covenants and easements. Didn't make any changes here, but just to kind of what this is addressing is essentially if a covenant is in place and it wants to be essentially transitioned into a permanent easement, this is how that would be addressed. And so next proposed change is another more of a clarification in subsequent conveyances, just that any covenant or easement that was acquired with OHP funds, if that's subsequently transferred to another holder, that it has to be made subject prior to approval by the commission and the OWEB board. And then I think moving on to 180, we have, again, these are more related to clarifications of, not even clarifications of roles, just a insertion of the board and OWEB at the end there, and then just our references to the rules chapters, just added that in. So no substantive changes, just tidying things up a little bit there. And that wraps up 15.
Great. and we're done early with that. So we did have some folks hop off and hop back on. So just want to give a chance to revisit any sections that people want to. We have a little bit of time here. And so if some ideas have percolated as we've been going through, we want to zoom back up to a section, now would be the time to do that. And then, like Robin mentioned, we'll be coming back with an edited version of this at the next meeting. Great.
Well, this is
go for
Doug,
it.
and
Yeah.
I think we did great getting through this today. I appreciate everybody's input and the fact that we stuck to the rules and didn't get too far afield on anything. So I really appreciate everybody's efforts.
Yeah, and we are going to take public comment here in a little bit. So I guess I think we had this question last time, and the answer was we should wait till the allotted time to take public comment, but we have that scheduled for 4:40, and it's now 4:11. And so I guess I'm looking to Renee or Eric or Stephanie. Should we wait until 4:40 to take public comment?
I mean, on all things like this, I would defer to our rules coordinator. I would say we could take it now, but if anyone new hops on before 4:40, we need to create space for them to give public comment. I think part of the question is, do we want to dive in for 20 minutes to the CMP division or not? But Hartstein, if anything I just said is incorrect, then let me know in terms of moving up the timing and then letting others who might patch in comment.
Yeah, I think it's okay to move up public comment. And I would definitely hang around, until 4:40. Yeah, just in case.
Okay. And then on the Division 10 front, we could do that. I just worry that our RAC members are maybe not prepared to have that discussion, seeing that we didn't have that on the docket for today. So
I am not in favor of moving to a new section.
Okay, well, so with that, we do have a few folks here who I assume are here to give public comment. Ellen, are you going to be facilitating the public comment, or do you want me to do that?
I think you should probably do that.
Great.
Because I haven't talked through the procedure of that yet.
Well, we're happy you're here and joining us. So, okay, I will go ahead and so let's see. If you are interested in giving public comment, go ahead and raise your hand. And then I'll call on you. You can unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you'd like. And you'll have 3 minutes to give your comment. So I'll start with Chris Wright.
Hey, Taylor, can you stop screen sharing before we start public comment?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This is Chris Wright. I'm a research scientist, planning commissioner for the city of Newburgh, and I'm running for state representative for Polk and Yamhill County. And I wanted to bring up you had one of your members talk about land versus soil health. And you may want to include it in your other natural resources in either the 2B or 3B area, and to include soils, but not limited to, in protecting, maintaining, or improving water quality. And this is why. When it comes to land and soil health, they are interconnected but distinct in concepts. Land is the definition refers to a physical space or area encompassing various elements like geography, real estate, and territorial rights. Soil health, though, is the continued capacity of soil to function as a bio-living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And one of its key functions is to regulate water, controls where the rain, snowmelt, and irrigation water goes, sustains life, supports diverse plant and animal life, filters pollutants, filters and detoxifies organic and inorganic materials, cycles nutrients, and provides stability of physical support for plant roots and animals and human structures. While in a community engagement with Polk County and Yamhill Conservation, Soil and Water Conservation, it was definitely brought to my attention that these ag properties some people are moving to these farms with no idea how to run them. And people need to become experts in many of these layers of farming. And some ag properties may not also be obvious of not only what types of soils are there, and there is a soil health index, but some people might not also be aware of endangered species or threatened species or plants. And that's all. And I hope you consider including that in the application criteria. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. We appreciate your comments.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So next up we have Nellie McAdams.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, everybody. I really just wanted to thank you for your good conversation. I think my comments were already addressed, and I apologize for not understanding that the material that was sent out with this meeting did not include the edits that you're already taking into account. So I just wanted to thank you, staff and commission, for your hard work on this process. I just wanted to pass on to, with Oregon Ag Trust, we happen to have a revolving acquisitions fund where we are able to cash flow things like appraisals and surveys that are pretty large expenditures, and then replenish that fund with grant funds once we receive it, so that we're able to float those costs. I just wanted to note that some of our peer land trusts aren't fortunate enough to have funds like that. And so when due diligence costs are reimbursement based and there is a long window towards final payment, that just creates financial hardship for them. And so just wanted to bring that forward. That's probably not a rules conversation potentially, but just kind of a financial reality conversation. So that's really all I had to say. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah. Oh, actually, can I just add one more little point? You will all be receiving an invitation to a series of 3 tours of properties that are related to Oregon Ag Heritage Program. These will be tours for legislators and local elected officials. One will be in Cresswell at Cresswell Oaks, where an easement was conveyed and they've done a lot of restoration, including with OWEB funds. Another will be in Forest Grove with Adelante Mujeres, Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District, and Metro, where we'll be talking about the importance of easements for land access. And then the third will be a virtual tour with Wallowa Land Trust and Corey Carmen, who was a grant recipient. And so you'll all be receiving those invites. You're more than welcome to attend any and all of those events. And even though the live ones didn't actually receive OAHP funding, the projects that they've done are very similar to the types of projects that OAHP might fund. And so we're using them as examples. So I hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Nellie. Anyone else for public comment? Okay, well, with that, we'll close, I guess, this version of the public comment period, and we will stick around until 4:40 in case there is other public comment. I have an announcement that I'd like to get on the record. So, as many of you know, we are currently recruiting for a new commissioner to replace Russ Holflick on the commission. This is somebody who's appointed directly by the OWEB board to represent natural resource interests, and the application is open until August 30th. And so just want to make a plug here that we are looking for folks to join us, and make sure you put it out to your networks, and yeah, get folks to apply if they're interested in this work. And feel free to put them in touch with me. I'm happy to talk through with them what the expectations are and how rewarding of a job it can be. And then we will also be recruiting for 3 commissioners here at the end of the year as well. So we'll be losing Bruce, Woody, and Lois. Unfortunately, they've been with us long enough to term out on 2 terms, and so yeah, going to be a lot of turnover at the commission, and we're looking forward to getting some fresh perspectives in here as well. But we're definitely going to be missing the folks that bring this institutional knowledge to the body, and so the more legwork we can do ahead of time and thinking through who to do the outreach to, and get some good folks to apply, I think the better off we'll be in the long run. So just putting that plug out there, tell your friends, and get it out in the community. So that's my announcement to the body.
And we all also will be sending out a Gov Delivery reminder. So this is our very broad, like maybe 2,800 person email list about the open recruitment. We'll be using that in the future. And I think always we hear some of the suggestions from the OWEB board think about how to cast a net that includes some diversity considerations also. So if folks have suggestions on organizations or entities that we could reach out to just let them know about the current and then upcoming openings, please send those along to Taylor or Robin, me, Steph. Always interested in having those suggestions from folks.
Okay, well, what should we do with their time, Eric?
Well, we could talk about when the next RAC meeting is scheduled and what is going to be in store.
Yeah.
For that.
Good idea. Okay, so my proposal is we look at Division 10 at the next RAC meeting, and potentially, if we can get through Division 10, we look at 20 and 25. I think Division 20 and 25, that's our technical assistance and succession planning grant programs, neither of which we've run. And so the majority of the suggested edits on those 2 programs are mostly going to be to align with changes we've made to 15 and 5, and changes we're potentially going to be making to Division 10. So I think those 2, Division 20 and 25, should be relatively light lifts. Division 10 will be a little bit more. I think very well could take an entire meeting. But that being said, I think we're getting our sea legs under us, and so we may be able to move through Division 10 relatively quickly. So that's what I'm proposing. And before I start throwing out dates, I'll see what Robin has her hand raised about.
Yeah, go ahead and start throwing out dates, but you mentioned, based on the conversation before we started, about the format of information and presentation of suggested edits and changes. And so since we do have a little bit of space, if we want to talk through how folks would like to see it presented next time, both for clarity, but also, to make sure that we because we do need to be able to demonstrate the changes that have been made through time. So I don't think I wouldn't advocate for completely discarding track changes from a just process perspective, but from a helping it be easier on y'all to understand what's being proposed. I think it'd be great to talk about that if we've got the time.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so let's do that. But before we do, I do have a proposed date. Looking at September 11th at the same time. So holding from 2 to 5, with the idea that we might have a short commission business meeting on the back end of that. So it might be 2 hours or 2.5 of RAC with a short commission meeting at the end. We don't have to confirm, but we can do a quick check here. September 11th, 2 to 5. Does that work for the folks that are on the call? Got a thumbs up from Laura and Ed. Smirk from Bruce.
I will not be able to make it. I'm going to be out of the country from the 4th through the 22nd, I believe it is. But that's a big enough window that I don't expect anybody to wait around for me. And you just did apparently just fine without me for an hour. You raced through all kinds of good stuff. So please schedule when it works for everybody else.
And for folks, Bruce, obviously for you for the September meeting, but for other RACs, when we've had folks who aren't able to attend, you're more than welcome to provide input to staff beforehand, and we can represent that during the meeting if that's helpful. We also can debrief after, so you're prepped for the next meeting, because I think as much as we would love to wrap this up in September, we're going to be having a meeting in October to put finishing touches on all of these edits.
And I'm happy to follow up, and if necessary, I would even try to find however many hours it takes to watch the video. But
okay,
exciting, yeah.
Taylor, I think I will be traveling that day to a Water Resources Commission meeting.
Okay.
So,
all right. Well, I think, and also there's, I mean, we don't really have critical mass here, so I probably should send out a poll. Did the poll work all right for folks last time? Seeing a few head nods. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do that. I'll send that out ASAP, and we will try and get folks to answer it by the end of the week so that we can get something on the calendar by Monday, just so we can get that time held. I know it's a bit of a busy time for some people, so I'll do that. Let's, for the time being, for those who can, I mean, let's hold the 11th from 2 to 5. I think that's a leading contender, but yeah, if we're missing Bruce and Woody already out of this small group, it might be looking for something else. Oh, another sidebar announcement. We do have a new commissioner who was just appointed by the OWEB board, Dan Bigelow, who's the OSU extension representative. And so he's unable to join us today. He had previous commitments, but he'll be joining us in future meetings. And yeah, I think he's very excited to be joining the commission. And I think he'll bring a pretty helpful and insightful voice. So FYI that we have a new member of the team. So yeah, let's spend a little bit of time talking then about, now that we're sort of like getting to the point where these rules are starting to take a form closer to their final form. How can we as staff be presenting the information to you as the RAC in a way that helps you both track what the changes are, and then, but also clearly understand like what the new rule set is going to be? Do we like the idea of having 2 versions where we send out a track change version and a clean version, or is there another way that would work better for folks? I'll go with Laura first.
I think it would be helpful to have both versions. I mean, and I'm assuming that that is not super challenging for staff to, you're going to be working with all of that. The other thing that I might request is just a little narrative sheet about the more significant changes. So that makes it kind of easier to track and also remember, or if people missed the discussion, know a little bit about what the discussion was or what the reasoning was for the changes. Not for every piece of punctuation, but just for the more significant changes. That would be helpful, if possible.
Yeah. Okay, and that would probably mostly be us pulling the commentary out of the comment boxes and putting that into a kind of a bulleted list that would accompany the document. That's probably mostly what you're asking for, because I do think some of the context gets buried in the comment boxes and it's small and hard to read.
Yeah, and I think the discussion we had today, if there's a way to summarize at least a little bit of that, that isn't going to be captured in the comment boxes. So that would be helpful.
Okay.
So similar from last time, like in the meeting, it doesn't need to be super detailed notes, but just kind of a little bit about where the more significant suggestions for changes came from.
Yeah. Okay. Appreciate that, Laura. And then Eric, did you have something to add, or you?
I did. One option, if folks are looking at a version of the rules in Word, is that if you go to review, you can change which kind of version of markup you're seeing. So if you're using track changes, you could show all markup or a simple markup as well, which sometimes helps when you're looking at a lot of red line. But I also know that these are being distributed via PDF as well. So I think it might make a lot of sense to have two versions of the document like Laura was talking about.
And the reason I like the two version idea is you guys are probably right. It is possible on your track version to make things clear, but those of us that are not very technically savvy, or we're trying to do it on our iPads or our iPhones, we're not able to do all those things. So what I do is when you guys send that stuff to me, I print out the different versions so that I can just read them on paper and not have to mess around on an iPad or an iPhone even, because I don't use a laptop or a desktop computer. So
yeah, that's helpful, Doug.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the main thing is for both for us and for the public, so we don't have to revisit all the things that we have decided. If we had a draft that's, the current working draft and one that's more comprehensive, if people want to look back to get the history and understand, where we started and how we evolved there.
Okay. Renee and Robin, I'm seeing some pensive looks. So I just want to make sure I'm not committing us to something that we don't want to
I don't think you are, Taylor. I think
Okay.
it's just the question of how we best utilize the next meeting to try to focus on the CMP division. But I think having some sense of like, what is the summation of the edits that have happened before, but what I don't want to do is have us like get into spin cycle about, okay, let's talk about this punctuation on these two divisions, and still we haven't touched the CMP, the Division 10 conservation management plans. So I think as long as we can manage our focus, we can do that, because it's helpful for folks to see the incremental progress.
Yeah. Okay. We have 5 more minutes.
I have a thought for the
Great.
next
Thanks,
meeting.
Ed. Okay,
What
yeah.
if we take public comments early on in the call?
Yeah. I think that goes against how it happens in other places in the agency, but again, I'll defer to our rules guru here.
I know about rules guru, but we've done it both ways, Ed. And I think what's helpful sometimes for having public comment later is people that are participating and listening into the whole meeting can react to something that's been said during the meeting. Like we heard, I think, you know, with Chris's comment and O'Neilla's. You could consider having 2 public comment periods, one at the beginning, one at the end. Yeah, another thing would be to, I think, adjust the agenda just to note that all times are subject to a little bit of flexibility. We've done that on other meeting agendas, just so folks know that if they are coming to provide public comment, that you should probably be at the meeting, half hour, 45 minutes earlier, just in case.
Gotcha. I figured there was a reason.
Yeah. It is hard to time it though at the end of a meeting because we're either like ran out of time or we have this extra time where we're waiting around for folks to do it. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Taylor, do you have a guitar? You kick it out for us.
I was just trying to think how to make this like good YouTube content, but no.
I think dead air is great YouTube content, Taylor.
You're muted, Bruce. We can't hear you. We can hear Doug chuckling though.
Yeah, so can you remind us what our target for final not adoption or recommendations?
So what we're shooting for, and another good announcement to make sure that it is very clear to everyone here that November, I want to make this right, November 7th. I am 95% sure. Yes, November 7th is our in-person commission meeting in Redmond. I mean, it'll be hybrid. You'll have the option to attend virtually if you'd like. But the goal is that we're both making our funding recommendations for this current round of easement grants and making our formal rule recommendation to the OWEB board. So that November 7th is what we're shooting for. We'll likely carve out a little bit of time in that meeting agenda to kind of like just make sure everybody's familiar and we're not sneaking something through at the last second. Just kind of do a recap of what we've done. But hopefully by November 7th, we've done 99% of the legwork, and it's just kind of a touchstone, and then we make our recommendation to the board. Yeah. Laura.
If there is critical mass of folks who are going to be in person, is there a plan for like a tour or a dinner or anything like that? Because I think it does look to me like an all-day meeting, right?
Yes, I mean, given our track record of one award meeting and in the past, it did take us pretty much the full day to get through that, and we did a commission dinner. We'll be putting folks up in lodging if they're interested in that. We haven't talked about organizing a tour just because we will likely take the whole day to do the awards, but
okay, but tentatively a dinner.
Yes.
After.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, that's
potentially
helpful
the night
for
before
scheduling
too,
for...
if folks come in the night before.
Okay.
And so, yeah, be keeping an eye
Great.
out for logistics on that front. I think Nicole and
Okay,
Ellen and
thank you.
myself will be working on that.
We have a block of rooms pre-reserved for everybody, as well as plans for at least one dinner.
Thank you, Ellen. Okay, it is 4:40. I am not seeing anyone who hasn't been here that's interested in giving public comment. So I would propose that we close the meeting. Seeing some head nods, some thumbs up. Great. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for I mean, this is a marathon, so thank you for your thoughts and your efforts on this front, and we're getting there. So we'll plan to send out poll here. I'll send that out probably tomorrow. So fill it out by Friday, and then we'll pick a date by Monday. At our next meeting in September, whenever it is, we'll hopefully get through at least Division 10, if not through 20 and 25, and see if we can't avoid an October meeting. But like Renee said, there very well may be an October meeting. And then at our November in-person meeting, we'll hopefully make our formal rule recommendation to the board. So go forth, have a great rest of your day, and talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Everyone. All right, bye-bye.